Okay, thanks everybody for joining. We've got Nat Kausik here to talk about two different papers that are coming out fairly soon. Correct. Well,
one's out.
One's out, the other one's coming out.
Right. Thanks, Cole. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for joining Zoom. I want to talk about will AI raise wages, which I understand is a hot topic these days. And we'll see what we can say about that. Right? It's based on a couple of different papers, as Cole observed. One is from a year or so ago, and the other is about to be released. That's joined with David Autor, I understand, and you know David of MIT. I've never met David myself, so this collaboration is entirely by email over the past year, right? Okay, so will AI raise wages? How many of you think it will raise wages?
For anybody?
Yeah, across the board, on average.
Yes.
On average. Will wages across the board go up on average? How many of you think so? I'm not so sure. But you're sure?
It's possible.
Possible, okay. How many of you think it won't? I guess by natural selection is the others. Okay, Danny definitely thinks it won't raise wages, okay? But we'll see. I mean, the one thing I do want to point out, as I was pointing out to somebody earlier today, is that during the Stone Age, there was no AI, there were no tools, there was no labor or capital distinction, but wages really sucked. And so we've done decently since the Stone Age, and so there is good reason to be bullish on continued increase in wage, right?
So,
okay.
So, I'm sorry, I came a little late, but when you say AI raise wages, it is possible that some people's wages actually go up significantly while other people's either go down or don't change?
Uh-huh.
So when you say ages, it's like average? Or
average across the economy, right? Do I point the clicker at some invisible button? Maybe. Okay. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll break up the impact of AI on two factors. As machines get smarter, two things are likely to happen. One is machines produce even more of the output than they do. And when I say output, I mean the economic output, the GDP, for those of you who are not economists. And labor share declines. So labor share here is, as economists know, the fraction of the GDP that is paid out as wages. And the second thing, which might be more ominous, is machines and humans can become more and more interchangeable. And this, yes, sir.
Oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt your sentence. I'm not sure about the first bullet. That has happened recently, but there have been, that doesn't have to happen. It depends on the elasticity of the substitution.
Right, but they produce more of the output, whether they reduce the labor share or not is a different story, but they...
Right, exactly. Yeah, I'm fine with the first half, but the labor share part is not.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a moment, right? And, well, yeah. So the second thing is that machines and humans get more interchangeable in the sense that this is the thing that scares us most, where, 2 years ago when you typed something into GPT, it hallucinated, and today it's gotten better. And as many of you who are students know, Czech is essentially out of business because the college tutoring thing has become completely automated, and you can get dazzlingly good responses to your homework assignments from a machine, and you wonder how the hell did this machine figure out this thing that even your professor screwed up, right? So, how many of you use Czech? Are there any students in the room? No, there is, yeah. So if you one can confess to using any of these. It's true. My daughters use it, and that's how I learned about these new things that are so much better. My younger daughter, who's what is she now? I don't know, a sophomore. She says, "Dad, you don't know anything. Math GPT is so good." And so I tried it, and it is really, 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 really good. I started using it instead of Mathematica because it's much better than Mathematica, right? So elasticity increases, and that's the scary bit. Will they really replace it? So the question is, will wages rise or fall under this presumption, right? Okay, So we'll look at these two factors separately. First, we look at labor share decline, and this is something that has been going on for a while. People have talked about it. There are really 25,000 plus papers on labor share decline on Google Scholar. And the question is this bad? Is it really bad? And is it because of automation in the first place? And then we'll talk about automation as a whole, the theory behind how to maximize wages. And lastly, we'll look at some empiricals and the impact of AI, right? Okay. So the first observation here is that labor share has been declining in industrialized economies. And this is the US from 1950 to 2020. What percentage of the GDP is paid out as wages? And it's been declining. And this looks scary because where's the money going? It's all going to shareholders and so forth. It's certainly not coming to the worker on the street, right? Make sense? Yeah? Okay. And so the popular view amongst economists is that this is a race between man and machine. So you can look at the literature, you'll see that, the sky is falling, we're doomed, machines are getting smarter, they're doing more of the work, and humans are not getting any smarter. Perhaps we're getting dumber, and so we're going to lose. There's no end to this. In fact, there are papers titled Race Between Man and Machine, and you'll see Acemoglu, who won the Nobel this year, and his co-author have written a series of such papers. Lowell is amused, but that's the essence of that view of thought, which is that we're doomed, right? But
Can I ask a question about the previous slide with the graph, the declining graph?
Yeah, let me see if I can.
That is the fraction of GDP that's spent on wages.
Yeah, right.
I see.
I gotta go backwards.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. Yes, there we
For
go.
clarification,
Yeah.
this may be a version of Friday's question, but this is a question from non-economists.
Yeah.
Even if labor share is declining, if the pie is getting bigger and bigger, couldn't labor still be better off?
Okay, so this is the crux of the paper and the discussion,
Okay.
which is, and only non-economists seem to think this way for whatever reason, which is, if the pie is getting bigger, you may have a smaller part of the pie, you actually get paid more.
Yeah.
And so the second paper that I talked about is called wage maximizing automation, in the sense
So
that,
that could happen. I just wanted to make sure I
and it exactly identifies the conditions under which that happens, right?
Acemoglu has a lot of writing on the which is not, you're not exactly being fair to him in terms of him saying glue. He thinks that certain types of robots did that, but his models kind of make very clear exactly the distinction between higher labor share versus higher wages and when these things are rival versus not. And it's all about the fact that some sorts of automation replace tasks without creating new ones for people to do, but that's not inherent to technology in general. It depends on any specific technology. And so that's his whole advocacy is about there's any AI that replaces what humans do without increasing productivity over
Frivolous AI.
frivolous AI is an issue, but he's not saying that AI has to do this. His whole thing is that it depends on which way it goes.
Yeah, yes and no. There are two things I would say. One is when you're a pipsqueak like myself, a hobbyist,
Yeah.
I can say things about Acemoglu and he doesn't do that. That's point one, right? If Lowell said these things, then there will be trouble, but I can say these
It doesn't work on me either, but.
But I can say these things. That's point one. So anything I say, you should take with a heap of salt. That's point one. Point two is my readings of his paper, and I might have missed the nuance he talked about. The latest one he wrote is called The Simple Macroeconomics of AI, where he essentially says AI has no redeeming qualities and it's going to contribute to society as much as social media, and therefore the net gain to GDP or productivity from AI is going to be 0.7% over 10 years. Right, that's his statement. And I would, I'm not a fan of social media at all, but I don't think it's fair to lump AI and social media. Right? But anyway, take point one as the bigger one amongst those. Okay, so let me go on to, so that's a broad view, but yet, as the survey from 2022 observes, the explanation for the decline in labor share remains elusive. And this is by Grossman and Overfield. And they look at the 20-odd thousand papers and they classify them into 5 different categories. One is technological change, which is to say technology is advancing and so it's somehow squeezing humans out. The second is globalization, which is we're exporting the jobs and therefore labor share in the US and other industrial economies are declining. And so if you read this paper by Autor Kausik, the China syndrome, I think it's called, the China shock, which is a popular paper. Concentration of market power in the sense that when you have a few companies dominating categories in the market, then more and more of the proceeds accrue to capital because the what shall I say, the inefficiencies that require more humans decline. And then unionization, which is the decline in the power of labor, organized labor. And lastly, workforce changes in the sense of, the workforce is getting older and therefore we're behaving differently than we used to, right? So against this backdrop, not being an economist, I can question all of these like I have questioned this. And I can say, maybe it's none of these at all, and it's biology, and I'll explain to you what I mean by this, right? So labor share in this thesis is a race between human suppliers and human consumers, in the sense that suppliers are always trying to automate every single thing they can in order to reduce their costs. And typically they tend to automate the most common things because that's where they get maximum bang for the buck. What happens is that consumers accept these lower prices and then come back and say, I want more customized output variants, right? So you take the lower price and you say, oh, I want my name on this thing, or I want my logo on this thing, or some variant. And that creates more work for humans. So, but what's happening is that suppliers are remaining sharp because suppliers are all in their active working age, whereas consumers are getting older. People like me are less interested in logo caps, whatever you might want. And so we're not really doomed, it's just that we are demanding fewer and fewer output variants. And I'll explain this with an example in a moment. So it's humans competing against humans, not humans against machines. And that leads to a decline in labor share because the consumer is getting less intelligent, right? Any questions on this? Okay, let me explain this with an example. So if you go to Amazon, yes, sir.
What do you think about the recent work, there's like Matt Rodging and folks that say that the declining labor share, because people are kind of using the wrong notion of labor share in ways that like reflect depreciation of taxes and housing, wealth and stuff like that, that it's not actually really a production function estimation, it's a kind of misunderstanding the accounting.
It could be, but I know even less about accounting than economics. So
but it's motivating you, so I mean, it seems like it's important, right?
It is, but I'm accepting at its face value the Fred chart, right? That is also considered in the Grossman and Overfield thing, but if I accept at face value what the Federal Reserve says, that's what I can say. So going back to the example, if you look at the simple example of baseball caps, you go to Amazon and you look at baseball caps, you can get plain caps, plain black caps for $2 each, and the production is almost entirely automated, and the labor share is probably a piddling 0.2. I'm just making up a number there, saying look, not many humans need to worry about these caps. They just ship it to you. But then you say, I want a custom logo on this cap, perhaps for a sorority event or a block event, whatever you want, and the price goes up to $8. And now the labor share goes up because you say, I want my logo on this, and then you send it to that person, and that person set the machine up somehow, and you get a cap that's higher price but has a higher labor share. The catch is you've got to come up with a new logo. And as you get older, like I am, you say, to hell with it, I don't really want a logo. I'll just wear whatever is free or cheap, right? What do you think about this, Danny? Do you wear caps? No. Okay.
I wear custom
logo, okay.
Yeah, for my classes, yeah.
We'll come back to this in a moment, in the sense that we'll talk about what kind of humans have declining cognitive abilities as they get older. It turns out that the more educated you are, the less likely your cognitive abilities declines over time, but that's a different story. And the other thing is that people who don't retire have better cognitive abilities than those who do. But that's my excuse. So we'll come back to that. But this is...
Are you retired? Sorry.
I claim I am. Yeah. So that's sort of the way I'm thinking about it, in the sense that in order for us to have a continued high labor share, consumers have to be just as innovative as suppliers, right? So here's the interesting thing. So we're living longer. So this is a chart of median age in the US on the left and several industrialized countries on the right. And so the median age of all these countries is going up, right? So now, we're not getting any smarter. And so this is this chart of cognitive abilities with age, and you'll see that most of our abilities are remarkably stable during the working years, and then things take a downturn. The only thing that looks better as you get older is your vocabulary. And so you're able to deliver bullshit better, so you sound good, but in fact, it's all bogus, right? And this is not my result, this is accepted from the, cognitive science literature so that's what's going on, right? Any questions on this? No. So now we can mix these two things together and say we're living long past retirement age. Consumers are aging faster than workers. The workforce remains just as sharp because they're all young folks. But as we get older, we're not able to demand output variance, right? And that's what drives down the decline in labor share. And I'm going to show this to you in two different ways to support my thesis. First is a mathematical model, right? Being a theorist, I can dabble in these. So let's model output as a power function, so some exponent r to the power n, and on the horizontal axis I have tasks by their rank fraction. So the GDP is always 1 normalized to 1, and this is all the tasks in the economy ordered by their diminishing contribution to the GDP. Okay.
Can I just ask a question about the premise?
Yeah.
In your Amazon hat example,
Yeah.
you were saying that the customized hat has a much higher labor share than the not customized hat.
Yeah.
Do you have any broader evidence that that feature is true throughout the economy?
No.
It is essential to the argument, though, right?
Yeah. So, it's what shall I say? It is essential to the example, but the macro data I'm going to show you doesn't assume that at all.
So, is the story simply preferences change over the life cycle and they shift toward less labor-intensive products? That's the story.
Well, yeah, in the sense that, I would say you can, let's put it this way. If we all turn into goldfish tomorrow, the last engineer can turn off the lights and follow on the path, right? Because you're no longer going to demand anything custom. Everything can be automated and drip food into the water, and we would never know the difference. And so in order for continued labor share on the supplier side, the consumer has to come up with new demands. And that's the broad idea.
So I know that's one part of the economy where it could be true.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't studied this specifically, but casual observation suggests one thing that might be relevant is as people age, they demand more of a whole bunch of different kinds of services, like home health aides, just general nursing services at medical facilities. They might require more of like financial planning services. I have some friends that work on how cognition affects investments and things like that. So those are all pretty labor-intensive occupations. And so you're telling a story that sounds plausible for a certain kind of consumption.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder what fraction of consumption is relevant to and whether you can just do the back of the envelope calculation where you calculate labor share for every industry and then look at the consumption weights by industry from consumption data as people age and just see whether they actually do shift toward intensive.
Right, I'm not claiming that. I don't have any data for that. And I don't know. I'm looking at this fully from the macro picture on the data side. What shall I say, regarding the things that you mentioned. Now, at the moment, we have human home healthcare aides, and we have to express to them what our needs are, and they will deliver on them. But one can conceive, as fertility continues to decline, we'll have robot home healthcare aides. And first of all, we have to tell them what we want, and the ability to tell them what we want is itself declining. And I don't have anything more than a hypothesis there as to what the breakdown is. So this is, if we consider that as a factor, this is what the data tells us. That's the best I can do.
Yeah, so there's kind of two separate exercises. One is a backward-looking exercise where you say, this is a mechanism that I think is important for the declining labor share we've observed over the past 40 years.
Right.
50 years. And then there's the forward-looking prediction.
Right. This is, I wouldn't say this is either. What this is doing is saying if the creativity of consumers matters, this is what things look like, and what things look like seems to fit the data. There are two thesis topics here, as you say. One is the backward-looking analysis, and the other is the forward-looking analysis.
Can't argue with it if then, so that part's safe.
So can you explain what this graph is again? I didn't quite.
Oh, so this one I haven't explained.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the previous one is just the output model, which says.
So the output, even just the basic output model, these are tasks. So what, I guess.
I'm not going backwards. Oh yeah. So I'm saying that the distribution of the output, cumulative output, as a function of the tasks, the jobs, and the GDP.
So you're saying that output, what is the kind of production structure? So you're saying that like there's a bunch of tasks.
Yes.
That some are responsible for more output than others.
So this is all tasks in the economy.
And you're saying that the power law is basically saying there's some tasks that are like superstar tasks that account for a lot of.
These are the popular thingies. So if you consider tasks that build bolts and nuts, they contribute a lot, and then as you get to the niche end, their marginal contribution is small.
So as an economist, the thing that's missing from this is when you're defining output, is it in dollars or is it in units of widgets?
Well, so it's normalized in the sense that the output is always one. You can look into it.
No, but it is, I understand that it's normalized.
It's in dollars.
But it's in dollars.
Right.
So what are prices here? But this is really important, right? As you produce more stuff, the prices go down because people become satiated with them, and then that's going to affect their rent, right?
Right. We'll come to that in a moment. So this is a snapshot.
Like this makes sense as like a stock of widgets in the economy.
As a what?
As if you're just counting things, if you're counting how many, you have a pile of toys, gadgets or gadgets, and you're counting the number of them, and there's some that are very popular, and now you're counting the number of things. This makes sense. But I'm not sure, how can you posit a...
Well, it's not just the counting thing, in the sense that the most popular things, right, even they may be priced low, their volume is high, but they contribute the most to the GDP.
Currently, right. So you're saying that if you make it more productive, though, that doesn't necessarily, the rank ordering doesn't have to...
It can be changed, and I'll come to that in the next slide. That's what the next slide is. The rank ordering changes as a result of, I don't know what happened. Well, got the wrong screen there.
Cole, are you sharing through the HDMI?
No, I'm sharing. I'm in the, here we go.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this comes to your question, I think. What happens when, at a time, after a little bit of a fraction of time, suppliers decide to increase their automation, so they eat some more tasks and say, I'm going to increase the automation. So the actual composition of this glob on the left changes, but they simply march towards the left in the sense that more of the output is now automated.
Why are they automating from the left?
Because these are the most popular things, and they decide to automate from the left. Actually, they may not even automate from the left. They may pick tasks, but the natural thing to do is to take the tasks that have the, what shall I say, that's part of the model. You assume that tasks that are automated are the ones that contribute the most to the economy.
Well, I guess.
In a marginal
You're
sense.
very specific and kind of like, I know you're kind of like for the sake of argument, but you know, in the literature on this, people think it really matters.
Yeah.
What you assume about the cost of adopting the new technology and exactly what the savings are and the amount of margin or not. It's not obvious at all that the automation comes from the left. I mean, like,
It's not obvious.
I don't think it's, and not only not obvious, but it's not. Like, I can't even think of a story where that's, it'd be a very weird story where that's true. I get that there's a sci-fi world that we're describing where this might be true. I'm just not sure why we think it's ours.
Sure. So this is the model. You may like it or you may not. But as somebody who ran a business for many years, for multiple businesses, the natural instinct is to say, take the thing that has got the most impact, let's automate it, because that's where I'm going to get the biggest bang for
But
it.
like, let's say
But you could suspend that disbelief for a moment.
But you could say like the biggest task in the world is Reiki healing. People love it.
Is what?
Reiki healing, you know, energy healing, where you put your hands over somebody and it makes them feel healed. Should go to more wellness retreats or whatever. Like, or whatever, some sort of like acupuncture, right? Where acupuncture has to be done by a person, so they're chief, whatever. And that's the thing that people love the most. It's what they spend the most on in the economy. People spend the most. It is the task that contributes the most to economic value. You can't automate it. How do you automate it?
So this is
Like I'm a business, like
this is the model. You don't have to believe that this model is accurate, but this is the model. And,
Okay.
Right? And you know, to some extent, I didn't make up this model. If you look at the Acemoglu Rest Repo series, they have a similar model. But
they're modeling explicitly the kind of.
This is the model.
And fixed cost.
You know, if you like Reiki massage, great. I'm not familiar with it, but I don't know what fraction of the GDP it represents. I don't know if it can be automated. Maybe it can, maybe it cannot. But I'm not saying anything about the validity of the model. I'm saying this is the model.
Okay.
Right?
I mean, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but maybe what you're trying to say and what you're trying to ask, maybe you're saying that if the task is done in large volume, that has a higher chance of being automated. So,
There's that guarantee.
so for example, you know,
See,
See,
they're saying there's not guarantee.
it's the model, right?
Sure, okay.
It's the model,
We're all right.
right? The beauty of being of not being an economist is that you don't have to worry about all the stuff that came before that holds one up, and you can ask, you know.
You don't have to worry, but there are valuable insights.
I know. So you cherry pick the insights that matter, and you leave the ones that don't. And then all you need to do is to take the risk of appearing stupid to audiences,
Sure.
which are okay by me. But it's what it is. So have some what do you call it? Faith in this. This is the model, right? So after a time interval t, more tasks get automated from the left. That's the model. And in the meanwhile, at the same time interval t, the humans come in and say, I got new tasks, new niche tasks, and they squeeze the whole economy to the left. So all the ranks of these tasks gets shifted leftwards. That's the model. I don't know where Reiki massage falls, but that's the model. And so if you take that model and you say that at equilibrium, what happens? Then, if you say that the rate of automation on the supply side is sigma zero initially, the rate of innovation on the demand side is delta zero. And what happens is that over time, because the median age keeps increasing and people get essentially dumber, and the dumbness rate is K, what happens is that in dynamic equilibrium over time, that's what the labor share looks like. And that's a simple exercise to follow through, right? Because suppliers are pushing from the right, humans are pushing from the left. And you're going to get an equilibrium, and the rate of which, the change in the equilibrium is reflected by that. So that's what the model says. Now, this is a wholesale model, not a pinpoint model. And if you take all that down and you say, let me fit the model to the actual labor share, using the actual median age in all these countries, that's what you end up with. So is this model faithful or not? I don't know. But you can even see the baby boom bulge in the median age being inverted when it comes to labor share in the US.
Are you refitting this across every country, or did you fit it in one place and then project it to the other?
So it's refitted for each country, right? So Because each country, they have a different cognitive aging rate, different median ages and so on.
That makes it a little less compelling than it might be otherwise.
Right.
If you fit it to one place and then show that out of sample it does really well, then you're not just telling me that you have sufficient free parameters to fit a
Right.
linear downward slope, but you actually
That comes
are
next.
fitting it.
But he's not fitting the graph. The graph in gray, that's not the
He's
input, right?
explaining it.
The input is the age distribution, right? The aging population
No, but the
distribution.
parameters gotta have to come from somewhere.
Yeah, so you could, so suspend the theory completely. Don't believe anything that I told you, the models or any of those things, right? And let's go here to this, which is a simple linear correlation, which takes, say, I don't know anything about the theory. So on the left, I'm showing you this is essentially a stand-in for K as measured from the longitudinal data for cognitive tests across various countries. And what this shows is, if you go from age 50 to 70, what percentage of decline do you see in your cognitive abilities across countries? And the US is actually the best in preserving cognitive abilities because we tend to retire later. And you can see Italy and Spain and France, where people retire early, their brains turn to mush pretty soon, right? So this is data, hard data from longitudinal analysis of humans. And then you take this and multiply it by the increase in median age, which is K times mu minus mu zero in the prior equation, and you post that on the horizontal axis. And this is the decline in labor share, and you see the fit between these two, the linear correlation between these two, and I'm leaving Spain out as an outlier, and I don't know why Spain behaves differently, but so if you ignore all of the theory, all of the model, that's what it looks like.
Just a quick question. I come from a country with greater cognitive decline.
Which one is that?
Germany.
Not too bad.
I don't know.
We've come to the right place though. Yeah.
But my impression has been automation technology carries across countries. So how much, a lot of these tasks that you're describing, a lot of the automation technologies are developed in the US and then kind of carried over to other countries. So in some way I would expect that the biggest country drives all of the automation. I wouldn't necessarily expect that your model fits country-specific labor share trends because the technology in use in Germany to a large degree is developed in the US. So how do you think about the transportability of these new automation tools across countries?
Well, I mean, what shall I say? There are products that are built in Germany for Germans, I would expect. And I can also think of a lot of products that are created in Germany that are sold worldwide. I don't really know. What is true is that retirement age varies by country, diets vary by country, and therefore the cognitive aging component does vary by country. Now, the question you're asking is on the supply side.
I'm more wondering about the production process.
Yeah.
Within the developed world.
Yeah, I don't know. So it's, my goal here is as an outsider to provoke thought amongst economists to say, think outside the box because somebody was asking me about this earlier. As someone who was trained as a computer scientist, machines are actually a lot easier to understand and predict. So computer science studies the flow of numbers, economics studies the flow of money. The key distinction between the two is that the flow of money is affected by how humans behave because humans value money, whereas machines are a lot more predictable than humans. So CS is a lot easier in that sense. But
no, I mean, I love the idea that the identity of consumers matters. I think that's a really interesting insight, and that so their age might matter for the types of goods that we consume.
I think any business person knows the identity of the consumer matters, right? But I don't know. The models are not perfect, but it's the model, but this to me was interesting in the sense
Well,
that
it'd be interesting to do a cut for like more domestically produced products versus non-domestic.
the data is very hard to come by, right? Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say that your graph on the right is a pretty good rebuttal to my hypothesis earlier that the labor share is increasing most in places where the population is, the labor share is decreasing most in the places where the population is aging fastest. That's the opposite of my, The y-axis is decline in labor share, right?
The y-axis is decline in labor share.
Yeah, so this is the opposite of what I was saying. This is not older people are using home health aides, which is a 100% labor share. This is literally the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Just wanted to highlight
Yeah.
my incorrectness earlier.
Yeah. I'm not thinking about home health care yet. Not quite that old, but yeah.
Is it possible that the little chart you show that the cognitive ability basically start declining after you're 50? You know, as time grows and our medical science grows and then we work for a longer time, maybe 50 years is not that bad.
So that's a really good point. But you know, that's a really good point. And I think I made that point in the paper, although I might not have because it's controversial, is that modern medicine is focused heavily on the physical well-being. So when you go to a doctor and say XYZ hurts or I got blah, they fix the physical thing. But then there's little effort being put into what is your mental well-being. You end up being a vegetable who's in really robust physical condition, but your thought processes are limited. And so perhaps it is. And
I'm not a doctor, but I feel like if you're physically better, let's just say at the age of 60, when you're physically better, I think you're mentally also better.
Yeah, so yes, but I think use it or lose it, right? In the sense that you're physically functioning, you're a fully functioning physical person, but then we do stop challenging ourselves after we retire, and that makes our mental abilities.
But the retirement age also will keep going up as we live longer.
In the US, it does.
Everywhere it will happen. You know, right now they might do this, but you know, they have.
It's harder to happen. So in France, they reached from 60 to 62. There were riots on the streets, the trains were stopped, and so on, right? Yeah.
So Nat, I mean, I like the basic idea here an awful lot. So I'll just tell you what a demographer / economist would do, has done.
Yeah.
So start with the overlapping generations model. This is the thing we were talking about this morning. So you have young people and old people. Now, how are young people and old people different? Well, as people get older, they stop. They start by getting educated. They don't contribute anything, but at some age, we start working. Then eventually we get old and then we retire and we stop contributing again. But we consume during that whole period. Right? That's the idea, these overlapping generations models, been around since Samuelson. So what your innovation is, pitched in that form. Okay, and what do we know? Like when people calibrate these models, they notice productivity changes over the life cycle. And they notice that the level of consumption kind of remains roughly flat, you know, but it also declines, it rises and then declines. You're saying that the mix of consumption changes. That's new. That's a good idea. Now, I agree with Andy. I think the way you model it is a little crude, but that's okay. So it's a starting point. You could microfound that thing. But the idea, your idea, is I think a pretty interesting one, and I've never seen it appear that there's like different kinds of consumptions, and then it remains empirical.
And we have great data on this.
We really do. You can get or you can find a co-author maybe that's to help you with this, but you could say like, what's the mix of how a 60-year-old or an 80-year-old or a 40-year-old spend their money, and it is true that young people spend a lot of money on stuff that seems crazy to me that's very, very specialized, like something that you can show on your Insta account that requires very labor-intensive inputs. The counterexample is home health care. That's the first thing I thought of too. As I grow older, I do have I think I have a less of a taste for variety. Like when you're younger, you're trying variety. When you're older, you kind of know what you like. So then your argument holds. But then there's the healthcare stuff, which just seems like it works the opposite. All this is empirically, it could be just worked out.
Well, I'll take you up on
All right, one other thing when you do the cross, people are going to push back on this who know growth theory. The capital labor ratio is also determined by the age structure.
Yeah.
The reason is that young people hold assets because we're holding assets as we get ready to retire, and then we start using our assets after we retire.
Right.
And in a closed economy, those things are completely determined. The capital labor ratio is a ratio of the capital that people hold and the labor. In an open economy, things are much harder, and somebody should be working on that. What's the effective population age structure change in a semi-open economy? I think it's a very hard problem. But anyway, it's another thing to kind of places that have slower population growth have older age structures, which in turn have possibly higher capital labor ratios just because they have more people my age relative to people Felix's age.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all for.
Well, we'll work on this next.
Yeah, I'm not time.
I'll take you up on that co-authoring.
Oh. Okay.
I already have one advisor in David Autor, but I'm happy to take another one.
Exactly.
So I'm reliving the life of a grad
I will be a
student.
big disappointment relative to David if you
Okay, so we only have 20 minutes
No,
left.
shut your head, right?
But so I'm going to go on to the other things here. So this is the collaboration with Autor that started out last year. I just sent him a random thought, and he came back and he said, "Bullshit, prove it to me," and I did, and then we got to working on this. And so the question here is, okay, labor share is declining. It may not be so bad as we think. It could just be a biological artifact. But does it? How does it affect wages? Does it help, hurt, that sort of thing, right? And so what we did here was the traditional view is that factor share, which is how you break up the tasks in the economy between labor and capital, is exogenous. That is, that's externally provided, and labor share pops out endogenously in the sense that the economy mumbles along to equilibrium, and the labor share falls where it may be. So what we're doing is to take the isomorphic view, which is to say, look, there's no reason why factor share is exogenous and labor share is endogenous. You can think about the economy in the other way, which is that labor share is exogenous and factor share is endogenous. And if you've hired a contractor to remodel your house, you may actually have participated in this model where, so my budget is X, you do whatever you can for this amount, and whatever you can't, I'm going to do. And in that case, you're agreeing on the labor share rather than the other way around. So the implication here is that production functions that you're familiar with, they can all be expressed in terms of labor share rather than factor share. And this is a mathematical trick that allows you to argue things about labor share that were much harder to argue in a more traditional model, right? Let me show you what I mean by this. Cobb-Douglas is the simplest. It kind of falls out where it says the output looks like that. TFP times capital to the power alpha times 1 minus alpha, where alpha is the factor share. But you can equally well write it in terms of labor share like so. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this. And it turns out that wages are maximized at 1 over ln K over L being the capital to labor ratio. And the maximum wage looks even funkier, which is K being the capital to labor ratio divided by ln K times the natural log base, right? And if you are operating in the economy, the prevailing labor share is to the right of the maximum, then obviously increasing automation, that is reducing labor share, causes wages to go up. Whereas if you are operating on the other side, then things are going to get worse, right?
And lowercase k is the capital labor ratio?
Yeah, K over L, yeah.
Right, and it's got those big numbers because it's normalized by some bull value of A or something.
The US is currently operating at 210 capital to labor ratio.
Measured in terms of.
Dollars per labor hour. Right? Okay, now the CES function can also be expressed in the same way, where the traditional thing looks like so, but I can turn this around and with a slight tweak, I can express it in terms of labor share. Right? Now you wouldn't find this in an economics textbook, but that's just algebra, right? Okay, what that does is you can show this, which is you fix the capital to labor ratio K so that it's big enough, whatever big enough means is expressed there. The maximum wage looks like that, and the associated wage maximizing labor share looks like that, right? So what happens is the optimal labor share, that is the wage maximizing labor share, keeps declining as K increases towards 0 when sigma is less than 1, and actually goes to 0 when sigma is greater than 1. Right? Just algebra at this point. But it comes from the viewpoint that you can consider productivity isomorphic in labor share rather than in the task share. Right? we can actually make this even more general. For any economy with constant returns to scale, the maximum wage and the wage maximizing labor share depend only on the capital to labor ratio. Okay, and you buy this? Okay.
So far, so good.
What?
So far, so good.
Yeah. So, I mean, they create some consternation amongst traditionalists because the task share has now disappeared, and in fact, it even allows the task share to be multidimensional. You can have one, alpha can be a vector of entries across different technologies and so forth, but that's what it is.
So, small rhetorical point.
Yeah.
Traditionalists to me are like the new way of thinking about this.
Yeah.
What you're saying traditionalist
Yeah.
is for me the last 10, 15 years of thinking about this.
Mm.
These tricks that you're doing here, I haven't seen those exact formulations, so I'm not claiming they're not new, they are new. But they feel very natural to a theorist who was working 40 years ago.
Yeah,
And that's actually how my training, I got my PhD right before this new generation of models.
Yeah.
And so this actually probably won't freak people out in the way that you're thinking it might.
yeah, Paul Samuelson knew this,
Yeah.
Well,
guaranteed.
it's freaked some people out. Enough people. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I love freaking people out. So.
You mind not freaking people out is, I guess, the question. So you mind not freaking people out, I guess, the question. This isn't particularly freaking out.
Yeah. Well, some people get freaked out. So
We can pretend.
anyway, so that's the general case. Now, okay. So the implication of this is pretty simple in the sense that automation is labor augmenting if and only if the prevailing labor share exceeds the wage maximizing labor share. And so if you look at all this hand-wringing about, is this good automation, is this so-so automation, all of that jazz, all of that comes down to one single thing, which is, are you above wage maximizing labor share, or are you below wage maximizing labor share? And if you're above, it doesn't matter what the automation is, as long as it is actually declining labor share, which some automation is.
So have you and David sent this to Daron, the paper?
No, he feels that if he sends it to Daron, it might shock him, but we will send it sooner or later. We've sent it out. He sent it out for review to a few people, and then he's going to post it on end. Yep. Okay. You have a question?
Okay, now I'm saying stuff that I don't know enough about, so we'll see what everyone
Well,
thinks.
that's my specialty.
But,
Yeah.
First, I don't think that you can represent the most general task assignment frameworks using a constant returns production function like this. So this is a statement you're making that's true in a constant returns aggregate production function world. It is, I believe you, it sounds right. You can, though, say more nuanced things about different kinds of automation and the implications of those things in those richer models that don't imply things like a constant elasticity of substitution or even constant returns to scale. And so it might be that it feels like you're arguing against this newer generation of models and that you disagree with them, where it's really just a difference of
I'm talking about task models.
Yeah, task assignment models.
Yeah. So we've shown these theorems in task models too. You can have a look in the paper. I'll send it to you.
So interesting, great.
Yeah, I mean, this all, I actually think that's less of an issue, because I mean, a lot of these are written to kind of be the capital and labor wind up being constant returns to the scale. I just, how do you think about automation here? Like, what is automation, if you're fixing the labor share, does automation change the labor share? Like, what in this sentence here, what kind of changes automation? Does it change the labor share? Is it a kind of like Hicks neutral TF?
That's a good question. Probably above my pay grade, but if you change the task allocation, you can think about that as automation. Now, two different task allocations can have the same labor share in this model, which is why I said task allocations can be a vector rather than a scalar.
But I guess in this statement, is the labor share being held fixed? I mean, you were laying this out.
No. In this statement, so the labor share has to decline in order for good things to happen.
Oh, I see. So you're basically, okay, so you say the statement is automation or technological innovations that decrease the labor share, and you're saying that.
Yeah.
So, okay, so this is totally, but I actually think this is a cool way of doing it, builds other tuition, but this is kind of like a restructuring of like the estimate task model. I know I used to teach the papers and proceedings article he had from 2018, that was like a nice summary. But I think this is just another way of characterizing. I mean, you're doing comparistatics on a different object.
Yeah, let's see what he has.
Well, maybe. maybe. I think the asymptotic task model differentiate with respect to a technology, data, and then you get bent out of shape because you go to the data world, then you go from there and come back to wages, and kaboom, either thing can be true. And so sometimes it works and sometimes
This is basically just the definition of there is a wage maximizing level, so if you're above it, then decreases.
Exactly. This is to show that everything boils down to that. You can throw away all of the other complexities and only reason in this fashion. And that brings more to, examples help. So then the question is, are all self-service technologies labor augmenting, which is what he calls so-so automation and so on and so forth. And self-service technologies displaces minimum wage workers to other jobs, and hopefully they find them. But there are cases where, like ATMs, what happens is in a self-service technology, you're actually shifting the job from the provider to the customer. Right? And some technologies increase the productivity of the customer. So when ATMs first came out, cashiers got laid off and so on and so forth. And then you move that work to the customer, but it makes the customer so much more productive because as a customer, a typical customer of a bank makes higher wages than the cashier. And so now you have more time. You don't have to go stand in line at the bank. You have more time. And the labor share declines, the productivity increases, and it's a good kind of automation. On the other hand, phone trees, their adoption has declined almost to zero because they actually reduce the productivity. Yes, you laid off all your customer service reps, but they reduce the productivity of everybody else. And so labor share actually increased because the output decreased as a whole.
So those are really good examples. Those are really good examples.
Yeah.
The one thing that I'm trying to, this all makes sense, this is really kind of interesting way to think about it. Is automation just a shift in the labor share in these production functions without a shift in TFP, or is it both?
So viewed in this sense, right? Automation is taking work away from humans and giving it to machines. Some automation is going to be good in the sense that it's going to cause labor share to decline, assuming you're on the right side. Another automation is going to be useless in the sense that the customers are not going to adopt it or the market is going to reject it, right?
There's another option that sometimes people think about in these cases is that you can have cases where there's two technologies that shift the labor share in the same way, the same reduction. But one also is like majorly productivity enhancing in general. It makes all factors, there's kind of two pieces of the technology. You can kind of do a decomposition where it shifts the labor share, but also given any split, it makes everything more productive. This is kind of what the socio-technology thing is that you can have the same shift of the labor share with no increase in TFP versus a major shift in TFP.
Sure. So let's go back here, right?
Does automation change A?
Let's go back here, right? So if your K and L are fixed, and you have two different technologies that cause the same change in labor share, if you operate on, say, the CES production function, output is going to be the same. There's no other levers available. You fix K, you fix L, you tweak lambda, you're going to get the same output.
What about A though?
So that's
what I'm saying is that technology, you can think about technologies as being characterized by an A and a lambda. That's usually how I think about technologies. Technologies are A and lambda, it's a pair.
Right.
And so the question is, you can talk about two shifts in whatever. All your results make sense if A is fixed.
Right. So changing A essentially is changing the economy, right? In the sense that you have a given family of production functions. You can keep one A, you can have a different A. Yes, A does evolve, it is part. We'll come to that in a moment, right? I'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah, we have 5 minutes left.
We're going to come to that in a moment. Okay, so let me, okay, this talks about A and why in either of AI, A is our only, what do you call it, recourse, essentially, right? Okay, so, awkward.
This moves to the hour.
This is why you have labor over there working on the console.
Expert.
There's an expert laborer over there. For some reason, you haven't automated this idea.
What?
Sorry, a bunch of us thought this was a full seminar at 80 minutes, and it's 60 minutes, so.
I have nothing to do afterwards, so I'm happy to stay on.
This in my calendar is 80 minutes.
I'm happy to stay on, I have nothing else going on, right? So, it's not a problem. Okay, so.
Then it's fine, there's a room.
Yeah, so I think this might touch upon some of the things there. So what we did here was we took 12 industrial economies. And, this is where I learned a hell of a lot from David in the sense that we had this paper written like 6 months ago, whatever, we didn't do empirical, it was a theoretical thing. And his point was that why would anybody believe any of this? Because you're saying, okay, labor share declines, but the data shows that wages are robustly associated with labor share, and increased labor share. Right? So where's the proof that declining labor share is actually negative? So we took these 12 economies, the US and then all these others, and these are the data sources. And here we took Clem's 1995 to 2020, whereas in the previous result I had Clem's 1970 to 2012. And the interesting thing is that in the prior period in Europe and Japan, labor share declined, whereas in these years, labor share in Europe and Japan actually increased. And I don't know why, but maybe there was policy intervention that labor share actually increased in the period, right? Okay, so that's the data. And what we did was to put in country-specific least squares of this form. So recall that for CES, that's what whatever that looks like. And we stuck it in this Taylor series. And what we did was to break things up into two groups, for the US as a country and the rest of the countries as a pool. The reason is we had 60, 70 years of data for the US and we only had 25 for the other countries, and so it was nifty, right? So, and we got dou ln W by dou ln lambda, which is the derivative of W with respect to lambda in percentage terms for non-economists. And that's what it looks like. And it breaks it up into two things. One is a direct effect. If you increase labor share, wages go up. And the other is the indirect effect. If you decline labor share, output goes up, and so you get a difference, right? Okay, and you plot, this is what you get. So the blue thing is the direct effect, where if you, this is the negative actually, where if you if you increase labor share, wages are going to go up. The red thing is the indirect effect. And the yellow things are the net, and the whiskers on the yellow things are the standard error on the estimate. So what this is telling you is that in all 12 countries, reducing labor share actually increased wages over this period.
So is the intuition here that we're too, relative to our technology, the baseline status quo technology, we're too labor intensive? Like right now, like given how much capital we have relative to labor, it would be better to have a more capital intensive technology. Is that kind of?
Yeah, that's what it's saying. Yeah.
Better flavor.
Yeah, that's the sense of it, right? That is, yeah, if you can get more capital, you'll have at it, then you'll increase wages, right? Yeah.
But that's when you're maximizing wages.
Wages,
You know, if you maximize output, which is what most policy makers try to do.
Yeah, so I don't know what happened in Europe and Japan, why the labor share went from declining to increasing, and I suspect some kind of policy intervention. But the impact of this is quite interesting, which is you can use the same algebra to get the contributions to wage growth in each of these economies. And in the US, you'll see the decline in labor share contributed plus 15% of the wage growth, right? Or almost 16%. Whereas in the other countries, the increase in labor share caused wages to actually go down, right? And this doesn't assume the theory or anything. It's just saying, like, if you fit CES to these economies, this is what you get. And in this particular case, we did allow TFP to change because we took TFP from the database itself. We didn't monkey with it, right? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I guess the one thing about the A thing that's still relevant here is that this is all kind of assuming that A is fixed. So the second order.
No, this allows A to change, right? We get the A from the database. We're not changing A. We're not assuming A.
No, but for the empirical fact. But for the counterfactuals. You're assuming that A is a process that is happening independently of language here. You're assuming that the shifts in, you have like D log A dt. You assume that there's some background secular trend in A, right?
I'm assuming these are the independent variables.
Right,
And
that's what I'm saying is you're saying shifts in lambda do not directly affect A in this model, in this empirical model.
Can I try to make it very tangible?
Yeah.
firms in these economies were presented by the world with a menu of technologies. They adopted technologies that in many of the cases happened to reduce lambda.
Yeah.
It may have been in the menu of technologies that were available to them that reduced lambda, all increase A.
Okay.
Because lambda and A are what determines a technology. So when I adopt a new production process, I'm changing both.
Yeah.
The odds that you wouldn't change both, at least a little bit, is very small.
Okay.
And so when you run these decompositions in these various bars, you're holding A fixed at the level you observed in the world. And so that doesn't account for the fact that the only way you can reduce lambda in many practical situations is also to change A.
Right.
And so there wasn't a world available to us that changes lambda without changing A. That's what Andy's trying to say. And I agree with
and that, because you're kind of thinking about these, like, your simulations, they're basically saying, what if we change lambda holding A? What's informing those curves is this fit where you kind of held a constant, holding a constant look at the effective varying lambda. That's kind of what this model does. The point is that technology adoption, when we think about it more generally, is a choice of, it's a technology. If you think from the firm's perspective, just one firm's perspective, there are technologies that are more or less productive given the same factors, and then there's ones that have different kind of implied labor shares. And so a technology is a pair of those. You're choosing between pairs of these, and so you're thinking right now about what if we chose among technologies the same A, but shifted lambda down, and everything you're saying is totally valid for that case. But I think the big question when we're thinking about AI and stuff like that is, you could have a case that, in general, by all this argument, is a decrease in labor share, that if A stayed constant would be bad for labor, but there's still such a big increase in Hicks neutral productivity, the total factor productivity associated with it, that offsets the shift in the labor share.
But I'm not keeping A fixed. I'm taking A from.
But you're not allowing A to depend on lambda.
Yeah, it's not a problem with your estimation. It's a problem with the interpretation of the results after the estimation.
Exactly.
Could be. Yeah, I will defer this to David, Autor, who's much.
And the thing is, because if you sure do it, like, this is one thing that.
Well, okay, so I can just like read from the paper. So it says our stylized estimates across several industrialized countries suggest that labor share is at present above wage maximizing level. I did not know that. That's interesting to me. And then it implies that technological change that reduces labor share without changing other production parameters. There we go. That's it, would boost wages.
Right, so that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
So, yes,
that's what paper
that's
says.
the interpretation.
We're all good. Literally what the paper says.
So you see, that's just my clarification.
Fine. This is why we have David.
Which, the one thing I will say is that.
Yeah.
No, it is, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. It's also this was the disagreement with SMO, where SMO,
Exactly.
the whole thing that you're talking about associative technology is about the associated increase in A. Right, that's what he's thinking. DeRone is fundamentally thinking about both of these things shifting.
Yeah.
And he's thinking about the trade-off. You're thinking about, let's just think about shifting lambda without shifting A, which is all totally valid. I think it's an interesting.
So let's talk about A in a moment, right? That's what I'm going to talk about next. Right? So here, the impact, right? So as machines get smarter, then if we hold K and sigma constant, then falling labor share increases wages, right? And if you hold sigma constant, rising K raises wages. So that's these different curves.
Are we holding A constant too here?
Yes, at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, at the moment.
Just
Yeah,
Okay, sure.
right. So like so, right? Now, if I hold K constant and I increase elasticity, wages decline. So that's the implication here, which is as AI evolves, our only hope is A, TFP, because all these other things, they're going to get messed up.
Yep.
That's the takeaway from this, which is we're betting on A being going up.
Yep.
And that's if you think about it as, what shall I say, the cause for optimism, if you will, and I'm probably quoting David inaccurately on this, is that AI will increase A. And I think that's the divergence between the skies falling mode, which is A will not go up as opposed to A going up.
Can I say something controversial, which is I think you exactly agree with Jonas. Like, this is exactly my read of his papers, is he's saying that if A doesn't increase, then AI will be bad, and that's exactly why he thinks the sky is falling, because he thinks AI won't increase.
Because he's saying A is not going to increase.
Yes,
You know,
that's what.
that's the difference here.
No, but I think, but so far what you said it all depends on whether I think like, there's this kind of like religious faith he may have that A isn't gonna increase, and I totally agree that I can debate that. But the underlying analytical framework, I think that he presented, are basically the same. I mean, like the underlying, I mean, you rearranged it to get different intuition, but I think you guys totally agree, is actually my sense. I mean, maybe your takeaways from it are based on a kind of your perceptions of AI and its effect of AI.
Well, I wouldn't compare myself to a single view, but you were.
No, but I actually think these are very comparable.
Anyway, so I think the net of it is exactly what we said, which is labor shares decline is completely orthogonal. It doesn't really matter whether it's declining or not, because it just will be because of biological factors. And then at constant returns to scale, the declining labor share is a good thing, because if your prevailing labor share is above the wage maximizing labor share. But then, as machines get smarter, meaning as sigma increases, capital deepening is not going to be effective. So the only thing left to us is this TFP thing, and the question is, will humans adapt to AI, or will AI adapt to humans in order to cause TFP to go up? That's what we don't know. That's the open question. And I'm optimistic, because there's reason to believe, without political intervention, there's reason to believe that humans will do the right thing in making AI adapt to us. We still have to wait and see. That's all I have.
Great, thank you.
All right. Yeah.
The part that's completely new to me is that, like, there's all these papers that are